On the edge of a withering little town in northern Michigan, where the pines grow too close together and the lakes lie still, as black glass 26-year-old Clara Monroe left her apartment for what should have been an ordinary drive. It was late September, the air raw and metallic, a night when headlights cut through mist like knives, and the faintest breeze carried the smell of damp leaves and rust. No one could have known it then, but this would be the last time anyone saw her alive. Clara was not the type of woman people overlooked. She was bright funny, a grade school art teacher, who wore her hair tied loosely in a braid and carried paint stains on her fingertips, like small permanent signatures of who she was. She had grown up in the same county, knew the back roads by heart, and always left her porch light burning before she went out. Friends said she had a laugh that broke tension in a room, a lightness that balanced the weight others carried. Yet beneath it, there was also a quiet independence, a streak that made her want to walk alone, to drive alone, to disappear into the kind of solitude that small towns often pretend is safe. That Friday night, she was heading to her sister's house just 20 minutes away. She texted at 8:42 p.m. that she was on her way, and then nothing. Her phone went dark, her car never arrived, and the stretch of county road that should have carried her safely was swallowed whole by the night. The first hours were denial, as they always are. Her sister paced by the window, checking the driveway, telling herself Clara must have taken a detour, maybe stopped for gas, maybe gotten a call. When midnight came and the silence deepened, worry began to grow teeth. The roads were empty, slick with dew. The town seemed to hold its breath. The morning brought panic. Clara's car wasn't in her apartment lot. It wasn't at her sister's house. The police were called. The same road was driven again and again, but there was nothing. No tire marks, no sign of a crash, not even a broken branch to suggest where she had gone. Just endless trees pressing in on either side, shadows lingering even after the sun climbed. The search began small, then widened. Volunteers, neighbors, strangers combed the woods, boots sinking in damp moss flashlights, catching on spiderwebs that looked like thin threads of glass in the dark. They shouted her name until their voices frayed, and in return, the forest gave back only echoes, long mocking reverberations that seemed to stretch further than they should have. At night, the searchers said the woods felt alive. Crickets swarmed in patterns that sounded like whispers. Branches snapped in the distance, though no one could see why. The temperature dropped quickly once the sun sank, and with it came a damp smell of mildew and swamp water, as if the earth itself was decaying beneath their feet. Clara's family clung to denial as long as they could. She was resourceful, strong. She had once hiked for miles after her car broke down in college. Maybe she had gotten lost, disoriented, but she'd come stumbling out of the woods any moment, exhausted but alive. The problem was, she didn't. 3 days passed. The forest grew darker, heavier. Deputies scoured every backroad, logging trail and ditch. Still, there was nothing, not a shoe, not a scrap of clothing, not a single piece of evidence that Clara Monroe had ever driven down that road at all. That's when suspicion set in. Police pulled Clara's phone records. The last ping had come from a tower near the lake, an isolated, rarely visited stretch of shoreline just north of town. It wasn't on the way to her sister's house. In fact, it was out of the way, a detour she had no reason to take. But the timestamp was exact 8:57 p.m. Friday night. 10 minutes after she sent her last text, her phone had been there along that lake, and then it went silent. Detectives began to theorize. Did she meet someone there? Was she forced off the road? The lake itself was unsettling. Thick black water, rimmed by reeds, the kind that rustled even when the air was still. Locals said sound carried strangely across it. A conversation on one side could drift eerily clear to the other, while footsteps just a few yards away could vanish in the damp silence. Divers searched, but the water yielded nothing. No car, no body, no answers. Just cold depths that seemed to absorb the light of their lamps. Search dogs were brought in, noses pressed low to the ground, but their trails tangled and looped back on themselves, as if the forest was erasing whatever path she'd taken. As days stretched into weeks, panic deepened into something worse, the sense that whatever had taken Clara was not only invisible, but deliberate. Her disappearance was not chaos, it was silence carefully laid. Neighbors began to whisper. Some swore they heard knocks in the night, soft taps at their back doors, too faint to be human, too steady to be wind. Others said they smelled diesel in the woods, even though no machines had been there, a sharp industrial odor that drifted through the pines before vanishing. And more than one searcher claimed they felt watched, the kind of stare that prickles the back of the neck and doesn't release no matter how many times you turn around. Police canvassed Clara's life. They found no enemies, no secret struggles, no reason she would vanish by choice. Her bank account sat untouched, her belongings left neatly in her apartment, the porch light still burning the way she always left it. Every theory opened a door that led to another wall. Weeks became months. Posters with her face curled at the edges from rain. Her students left flowers at her classroom desk. The town carried on, but always with the shadow of Clara's absence pressing down. The case grew cold, but not silent. Because on the 91st day of her disappearance, hunters stumbled across something deep in the woods, something that turned denial into horror and suspicion into dread. They found her car. Hidden off a dirt track, rarely used, barely visible beneath a scatter of leaves, the sedan sat, as if abandoned. The windshield was intact, the tires unburst, the doors were locked, and inside the strangest detail of all, Clara's purse, her wallet, her phone all neatly placed in the passenger seat, as if she had stepped out for only a moment and meant to come right back. But she never did. And it was then, staring at that locked car, that investigators realized the truth. Clara Monroe had not simply vanished. She had been consumed. The car sat like a coffin with its lid closed, silent, immovable, swallowed by branches that seemed to lean toward it as though guarding a secret. For 91 days the woods had hidden it. For 91 days, search parties had combed the area, walked within yards of it, called Clara's name into the still air, and yet somehow no one had seen it until now. The deputy who forced the door open said the smell hit him first. Not decay, not the stench of death he had braced for, but something sharper, stranger. A blend of mildew-wet leaves and the faint sting of diesel fuel. The interior was dry, untouched by weather, but the odor clung to the upholstery as if it had soaked in over weeks. He backed away, uneasy, his flashlight trembling against the glass. Forensic teams swarmed the scene. They searched every inch of the car, every scrap of earth around it. No fingerprints, but hers. No blood. No signs of a struggle. The driver's seat was adjusted exactly to her height. The keys were gone, but the glove compartment held her registration, her insurance card, untouched. A faint smear of mud marked the driver's side mat, though the pattern didn't match her shoes. And then there was the phone. It was dead, battery drained, but inside its memory sat the final record of her existence, the last outgoing text. On My Way stood at 8:42 p.m., but at 8:55, just before the tower ping by the lake, the phone had received something, a call, from an unknown number, one that had never appeared in her logs before, one that no one could trace. The call had lasted 47 seconds. No voicemail, no transcript, just silence on record. Detectives grew cautious with their words, but the air shifted. They began to speak less of an accident, more of an encounter, less of a disappearance, more of an abduction. Still, the evidence was thin, thinner than anyone wanted to admit. It was as if someone had swept behind them, erasing every trace they left, leaving only the locked car like a mocking gift. Her family spiraled. Hope, at first renewed by the car's discovery, curdled into despair. Her mother begged police to dredge the lake again. Her sister slept in the living room with lights on, claiming she heard footsteps on the porch at night, soft and deliberate, always stopping short of a knock. The search widened. Dogs sniffed the ground around the car. They picked up something faint, fragmented. A trail that led deeper into the woods across damp moss and low brush. For 300 yards, it held steady. Then just as suddenly as it began, it ended. Not faded, not scattered, ended. As if Clara had been lifted from the earth and carried into the air. Searchers came back shaken. They whispered of strange sounds as they walked, clicks like stones tapped together following them through the trees. Others swore they heard running water, though no creek or river was anywhere near. One volunteer described the woods as breathing, expanding and contracting in silence, branches shifting without wind. They returned pale, swearing they would not go back after dark. Detectives, though, pressed on. They mapped the area, tracked down. Locals questioned anyone who might have seen Clara that night. They found a farmer who claimed he saw headlights near the lake around 9 p.m., moving slowly as if circling. Another resident swore he heard a woman's voice calling faintly from the trees the following night, though when he searched the woods were empty. The stories multiplied, tangled, contradicting one another. And then came the first real clue. 2 weeks after the car's discovery, a deputy walking a logging trail about a mile from the site noticed something nailed to a tree. It was a strip of canvas, weathered, streaked with mud. At first glance, it looked like discarded trash, but on closer inspection, words were scrawled across it in thick black marker. Just 3. You can't leave. The letters were shaky, uneven, as if written in haste. Forensic testing proved little. The ink was common, the canvas ordinary. But when Clara's sister was shown the fabric, her face went pale. She recognized it immediately. It was a strip from one of Clara's painting aprons. The message changed everything. Detectives locked down the area. Searchers combed the trails again, eyes scanning bark and branches, as if more clues might be strung through the forest like breadcrumbs. But no others appeared. Just the single strip of canvas nailed at eye level, pointing nowhere, promising nothing. The town grew restless, then fearful. Rumors spread of a presence in the woods, something human enough to walk among them, but wrong enough to remain unseen. Some said it was a drifter, someone who had watched Clara, chosen her, taken her. Others spoke in lower tones, insisting the land itself was cursed, that the lake had taken her the way it had taken others before. It wasn't the first disappearance in that county after all. Nights grew colder. Searchers pulled back. The case, once a storm, slowed into a drip of small leads, each one evaporating as quickly as it came. Detectives kept their files open, but the pages grew heavier with dust. Clara's family begged for answers. None came. And then, on the 6-month mark, as if to remind them that silence does not mean safety, another discovery surfaced. A fisherman casting along the lake's northern edge reeled in something that snagged beneath the surface. At first he thought it was weeds. Then he saw fabric, wet, heavy, clinging to itself as he dragged it to shore. It was a jacket, small, pale blue. Inside the collar was a name written in faded black ink. Clara. The jacket smelled of swamp water and mildew. The cuffs were frayed. But the strangest part wasn't what it was. It was where it was found. Near the spot where her phone had pinged that night. A place divers had searched, a place already combed and cleared. Yet somehow, 6 months later, it surfaced as if the lake itself had decided to give it back. Detectives studied it, tested it, begged for a lead hidden in the fibers. None came. No fingerprints, no DNA that didn't already belong. Only the faint scent of diesel clinging to the lining, sharper than the swamp's rot. That night, her mother said she dreamed of Clara, standing at the edge of the lake, hair dripping, face pale, holding out her hand as though she wanted to speak. When she woke, the sound of water dripping echoed through her house, though every faucet was dry. The search once again began to tighten around the lake. The lake became the heart of the case, a black mirror that swallowed every theory, every desperate search, and gave back nothing but silence. On its surface, the water seemed still, almost calm, but beneath lay shifting currents, sudden drops and shadows that twisted with every beam of light. Divers described the depths as endless, a place where beams of their flashlights cut only a few feet before vanishing into ink. The mud at the bottom clung like glue, swallowing equipment, pulling them down with a pressure that felt more alive than mechanical. Detectives staged repeated searches. Boats lined the water nets, dragged the shallows, sonar traced the bed. Each attempt ended the same: no car, no body, no trace beyond the blue jacket pulled weeks before. What unsettled them most was the shifting nature of the evidence itself. The jacket had surfaced where divers had already scoured. Tracks in the woods appeared fresh, then evaporated the moment dogs gave chase. The land seemed complicit, offering just enough to keep them searching, then mocking the effort with nothing at all. For the family, denial finally fractured into something darker. Clara's mother began to insist that the lake was holding her daughter, not dead, not alive, but caught in some in-between state. Her sister moved out of her house too, afraid of the nightly footsteps she swore still circled the porch. Her father, quiet and stoic, drove the same back road every evening, at dusk headlights, carving the same mist, as if he could somehow pull her car back from the moment it vanished. Detectives pressed forward. They revisited the call logs, the unknown number that had reached Clara in those final minutes. They traced it through carriers, ran it against databases. Nothing. The number did not exist, not registered, not tied to a device. As if it had only flickered into being, long enough to connect to hold her in silence for 47 seconds, and then dissolved again. And there was more. Cell tower data showed that the same untraceable number had pinged again weeks later, this time near the lake. At 3:14 a.m., a single call, no recipient, no record of who answered. A phantom echo. By then, officers had begun to speak quietly among themselves. One deputy refused to patrol the area alone at night. Another claimed he had seen a light moving through the trees by the shoreline, a glow that slipped between the trunks like it wasn't bound to earth. Yet every time he chased it, the forest grew silent, darker, thicker. He never caught it. The environment itself was turning hostile. Searchers reported a low humming in the woods, faint but constant, like machinery running far beneath the ground. At night, the smell of rust seemed to rise from the soil. Insects droned louder than usual, their patterns broken, frantic, as if disturbed by something unseen. The atmosphere was shifting, dragging the case from the ordinary into something else, something that blurred the line between human crime and something older, darker. Still, detectives clung to human answers. They revisited every person in Clara's life, co-workers, old friends, former students' parents. They probed her past, searching for hidden grudges, old relationships, anyone who might have followed her. But each path collapsed. Clara had lived simply with no trail of bitterness behind her. If someone had taken her, it was not because of who she was, but because she had been chosen. And then came another clue, this one far stranger than the rest. It was a hunter again who stumbled upon it. Deep in the woods, a mile north of the lake, he found a clearing he swore had not been there before. The ground was bare, stripped of brush, the soil turned up in a rough circle nearly 30 feet wide. At its center sat something impossible to dismiss, a ring of stones carefully placed, each one dark with scorch marks. Within the circle lay ashes, though no wood remained, as if the fire had consumed only itself. Among the ashes was a fragment of cloth, thin white, faintly streaked with blue paint. The hunter didn't touch it. He backed away, called deputies. When investigators arrived, they too stood uneasy at the edge of the clearing. The air felt wrong, thick, metallic, with the smell of burnt plastic, though nothing around them bore marks of fire. The fragment of cloth was collected, bagged, tested. Weeks later, the results returned. It matched the fibers of Clara's apron, the same one that had already left behind its cryptic warning, "You can't leave." The discovery split the investigation in two. Some detectives argued it was evidence of a killer's ritual, a staging ground for someone who enjoyed taunting police. Others, though, quietly admitted the unease they felt. The clearing was not on any map. Old aerial surveys showed the area covered in trees, dense and unbroken. Yet now it was bare, as though something had scraped the earth clean in silence. Rumors spread again, faster this time, faster. A few locals whispered about old stories, tales of people lost near that lake decades ago. Stories never written down, but passed in hushed tones. Hunters, vanishing campers, walking out of their tents into the dark and never returning. They spoke of the lake as hungry, the woods as restless, the land itself as a mouth that occasionally opened and swallowed whole. For Clara's family, reflection came hard. They spoke of her in past tense, now voices cracking with guilt, as if acknowledging the truth was a betrayal, but silence was worse. Her students left drawings at the edge of the lake, paper boats carrying messages written in crayon. "Come home, Miss Monroe." The papers sank one by one, vanishing beneath ripples that closed over them without a trace. Time dragged on each day, suffocating in its sameness. The case no longer moved forward. It circled itself like a predator biding time. And then nearly a year after Clara's disappearance, when even her family began to whisper that she was gone for good, the investigation struck its most terrifying turn. A deputy conducting routine patrol around the lake late one evening reported something strange. His headlights cutting across the mist caught movement by the shoreline. A figure, he said, standing still at the water's edge. He braked hard, aimed his beam. For an instant, the shape resolved into the outline of a woman, hair-long clothes, pale, her head turned as if listening. And then she was gone. He leapt from his car flashlight, scouring reeds and shoreline, calling into the fog. There was nothing. No prints in the mud, no broken reeds, no sound but the lapping of water. Yet when he returned to his vehicle, he found something lying across the hood. A single sheet of paper, damp but intact. On it, written in smeared pencil, were the same words as before. "You can't leave." The paper was tested, handled, dissected. No fingerprints, no explanation. But its presence rattled everyone. Whoever left it had stood close enough to touch his car while he searched only yards away. It was then, for the first time, that investigators admitted aloud what had been gnawing at them in silence. The case was no longer just about what had happened to Clara Monroe. It was about something else. Something that lingered in those woods, in that water. Something that did not want to let go. And as the second year of her disappearance crept closer, the fear grew heavier, pressing against the edges of the town, waiting for its next move. The warning, "You can't leave," settled over the investigation like a curse. Detectives who once spoke of suspects and motives now spoke in clipped tones about patterns, about timing, about a presence that seemed to anticipate every step they took. Some officers requested reassignment, others stayed, but they carried the weight of the case home, haunted by knocks in the night, by dreams of water rising silently through their houses, until it reached their throats. The town too changed. Windows stayed locked even in summer. The roads near the lake grew abandoned after dusk, the silence broken only by insects that shrieked at unnatural volume, before cutting off all at once, leaving the woods suffocating in stillness. Families whispered that the place itself wanted to be forgotten, that by searching they had awakened something that thrived on their fear. Detectives, however, pressed further. They mapped every disappearance in the county going back half a century. A boy lost on a hunting trip in 1974, never found. A couple who vanished from a campsite in 1989 tent, zipped belongings undisturbed. A man whose truck was discovered on the same back road in 2003, doors locked, keys missing. His body was never recovered. The pattern was there, staring back at them. Vanishings tied not to people, but to place. Always within a 5-mile radius of the lake. Always leaving behind objects arranged too neatly, as if to mock the idea of closure. The case ceased to be about Clara alone. She was part of something older, larger, threaded into decades of absence. And yet hers was the only case to leave behind words, those chilling fragments. "You can't leave." The family clung to what little they could. Her mother carried the jacket with her everywhere, folded in a bag, pressing it to her chest in moments of stillness. Her father stopped driving the back road. Instead, he parked by the lake and sat in silence, headlights off, staring at the water until dawn bled into the trees. Her sister left town altogether, unable to walk through rooms where Clara's laughter still seemed to echo. Detectives began to fracture under the weight. One lead investigator, a man with 20 years of service, confessed privately that he no longer believed this was a case solvable by human means. He spoke of the forest as though it were sentient, predatory. "We're not looking for a person," he told a colleague. "We're standing in the mouth of something that doesn't want to let go." Weeks later, he requested medical leave. He never returned to the force, And still the case would not rest. It was late October, the second year after Clara's disappearance, when the final discovery came. A group of teenagers, ignoring the town's quiet warnings, had ventured to the lake one night. They brought beer flashlights and a hunger for the thrill of standing where someone had vanished. At first the night was uneventful, the usual laughter, the bravado of pretending not to be afraid. But just after midnight, one of them screamed. In the shallow water near the shore, half buried in silt, something pale jutted out. At first they thought it was driftwood, but when they kicked away, the mud fabric emerged stiff, waterlogged, clinging to something solid beneath. They ran breathless, pounding on the nearest door until a deputy was called. By dawn, the shoreline was crawling with investigators. They dug carefully, pulling fabric from the earth, another apron paint-streaked, wrapped tightly around something small. Inside was a notebook. It was hers, Clara's. The pages were soaked, warped ink bled into watercolor smears, but some words remained. Dates scrawled in the margins, short fragments of sentences, pieces that made no sense alone, but together told something darker, more suffocating than anyone expected. Someone watching. The sound doesn't stop. They keep calling, but I can't answer. I tried to leave. You can't leave. The final entry was a single line written so faintly it nearly vanished into the paper. It's already here. The words froze investigators. They argued over what it meant. Was Clara alive long after her disappearance, held somewhere unseen? Was she leaving messages for whoever might find them? Or were these pages staged, planted to prolong the terror, to convince them the impossible was true? The notebook was logged into evidence. Analysts combed it, tested it, debated it. No fingerprints beyond hers. No explanation for how it surfaced after divers had searched that exact stretch of shore a dozen times before. The effect on the town was immediate. Fear became certainty. Something lived in those woods, in that lake. Something that didn't just take people but lingered, taunted, reminded them of what it held. The case was no longer cold. It was burning, but with a fire no one could touch. Reflection settled heavily. Detectives who once swore by procedure admitted off record that they dreamed of the woods, that they heard Clara's voice calling in empty rooms, that they woke in the night to the smell of mildew and swamp water, though they lived miles from the lake. Some resigned, others hardened, promising to drag the truth from the earth no matter how deep it was buried. But the truth never came. Clara Monroe's body was never found. Her car, her jacket, her apron, her notebook. These became her grave markers, artifacts of a story that remained unfinished. The files stayed open, gathering dust each page, a reminder of the night a young woman vanished into silence. And yet the silence was never complete. Even now, years later, hikers claim to see pale light flickering by the water's edge. Fishermen swear they hear knocks echoing across the lake at night, steady, deliberate, as if someone were trapped beneath. And in the homes nearest the woods, residents whisper of footsteps pacing porches long after midnight, footsteps that never lead away. The case remains unsolved. The truth remains out of reach. But the message endures, etched into the investigation, into the minds of everyone who touched it, into the marrow of the town itself. You can't leave. And maybe that is the coldest truth of all, that some vanishings are not endings, but beginnings, that some part of Clara Monroe, whether memory or echo or something far more unexplainable, is still there. Still waiting, still watching, still refusing to be forgotten. The lake holds its silence, the woods hold their breath, and the night once again swallows sound, screaming in the quiet, for those who are willing to hear. Years passed, and still the name Clara Monroe carried weight in that town, like the echo of a bell that refused to stop ringing. The case never closed. It hung suspended each page of the file, a shadow that followed the men and women who once swore they would solve it. Some retired, some fled the county altogether, and some stayed but never spoke her name aloud, as if saying it might call the silence back into their own homes. Her family fractured under the weight of absence. Her mother's hair turned white within months, though she was only in her 50s. She carried the apron fragment like a rosary bead, clutching it between her palms during long nights of prayer, whispered to no one. Her father withdrew, spending hours by the lake, motionless, as if waiting for Clara to surface from the water at last. Her sister tried to rebuild a life far away, but she confessed to friends that sometimes in the middle of the night, her phone would light up with a missed call, always from an unknown number, always lasting exactly 47 seconds. And the detective, the one who had taken the case into his bones, who had carried the files home and slept with them stacked by his bed, he never stopped. Even in retirement, he traced maps, walked the back roads, sat by the lake, until the fog blurred into his breath. He told himself it was duty, but the truth was darker. The case had consumed him, and he knew it. He wrote journals of his own, filling them with details he never dared share with colleagues, the nights when he woke to find muddy footprints on his porch, the mornings when the air inside his house carried the scent of rust, sharp and metallic, the whispers he heard in the woods while walking alone, whispers that shaped themselves into words he could almost make out, words that chilled him to his core. You can't leave. He never told anyone about the dream, the one that returned over and over with the same unshakable clarity. In it, Clara stood at the lake's edge, her braid damp, her jacket heavy with water. She never spoke. She only looked at him, eyes wide with something that was not fear, but warning. And then, as the dream always ended, she turned toward the water, stepped in, and the surface closed over her without a ripple. He would wake, gasping, the sound of dripping water still echoing in his ears. But what unnerved him most was not the dream itself. It was that each time when he rose to clear his head, he found the porch light burning, the same way Clara had always left hers. The case file grew dusty. Officially, it became a cold case frozen in bureaucratic limbo, a statistic among thousands of others. But for the detective, and for the families who had lost their loved ones to the same circle of woods, it was never over. There was no closure. Only questions that deepened like sinkholes the longer they were left unanswered. The environment itself became a suspect. The lake with its swallowing silence, the woods with their shifting echoes and unnatural stillness, the air heavy with mildew and diesel where no machines had ever run. It was as though the land fed on memory, trapping the living in its grip, refusing to release what it had taken. The detective once said in a rare interview years later, "It wasn't a man. If it were, we'd have caught him. It wasn't an accident. If it were, we'd have found her body. What we were looking for was something we don't have a word for. And maybe we never will." Those words unsettled people more than any evidence could, because the silence that followed them was heavier than truth. It was recognition. Recognition that what had happened to Clara Monroe could happen again. And it did. Not long after the 10th anniversary of Clara's disappearance, hikers reported hearing a woman's voice calling from deep in the trees near the lake. Search teams combed the area but found nothing. 2 weeks later, a fisherman swore he saw a pale figure standing knee-deep in the water staring at him before dissolving into mist. He left his nets behind, quit fishing the lake altogether, and moved 3 towns away. Then came another car. It was found on the same back road where Clara's had been left, doors locked, keys missing. Inside the purse of a young woman named Angela Holt, who had vanished days earlier. The similarities were undeniable, the echoes too sharp to dismiss. Detectives reopened the Monroe file, dust clouding the air as they pulled old evidence back into light. And once again, the whispers began. The cycle had returned. For Clara's family, reflection became suffocating. They no longer begged for closure. They no longer prayed for answers. They spoke of her quietly, carefully, as though she might still hear, as though the silence could be provoked into anger. Her mother once said in a trembling interview, "It isn't about where she is. It's about where she isn't. She isn't here. And that is enough to break me." The detective, older now, retired, and weary, made one final trip to the lake. He sat on the shoreline at dusk, the water unmoving, the trees pressing close. He lit a cigarette, his hand unsteady, and whispered into the dark, "I know you're still here." The wind stirred, rippling the reeds. A knock echoed 3 taps steady, deliberate though no one was near. He closed his eyes, listening, his breath heavy. He knew he had spent his life chasing something he could never catch, something that was not meant to be solved. But still, in that final moment, he swore he felt a presence at his side. The faintest brush of water-damp air, the smell of mildew, and a voice almost too soft to hear, breathing the same words that had haunted the case from the start. "You can't leave." And maybe she was right. Maybe Clara Monroe never left those woods, never left that lake. Maybe no one does not truly. Maybe the land itself collects the voices of the vanished, holding them like secrets, waiting for the living to wander too close. The file remains open. The questions remain unanswered. The silence grows heavier with every passing year. And still, when night swallows sound in that town, when headlights cut through the mist and the smell of rust lingers in the air, people remember Clara. Not because she is gone, but because she is still there. The lake waits, the woods listen, and the night, suffocating and endless, whispers the same truth into the dark. You can't leave. The official record ends in silence, a single word stamped across the file, unsolved. But records are only the bones of a story, stripped bare of the flesh and blood, of the dread that saturates every shadow in that town. The real ending lives in whispers, in half-spoken confessions, in the haunted eyes of those who still walk the roads where Clara Monroe vanished. Years after her disappearance, the detective who had given himself to the case lived alone in a small house on the edge of the county. His colleagues were gone, retired, scattered, or dead, and his name barely registered in the department anymore. But within his home, the case had never closed. Boxes of photographs lined the floor. Maps with red threads stretched across them filled the walls. He spoke less of suspects and more of patterns, circles, spirals, places where silence thickened, as though something breathed beneath the earth. Neighbors said his lights never went out. At 3 a.m, they could see the glow through his curtains, the flicker of him, moving from desk to wall to desk, as though mapping something that refused to stay still. When asked why he still worked, he only said, "Because she hasn't left." He returned often to the lake, always alone. He carried no flashlight, no notebook, only stood at the shore and stared. Some nights he spoke words too low for anyone to hear. Others, he simply listened. A deputy once drove past and saw him kneeling in the shallow's water, lapping against his chest, eyes fixed on the black surface, as though waiting for something to rise. And maybe he was right to wait, for the town itself seemed unable to move on. The lake did not give up its silence. The woods did not release their grip. More disappearances followed, never frequent, never clustered, but steady enough that the place earned a reputation, cursed, haunted, wrong. Outsiders came to gawk, to camp, to tempt fate, but many left quickly, unnerved by the unnatural quiet that pressed in after midnight. They spoke of footsteps pacing outside their tents, of whispers in the brush, of a smell like rust and mildew that clung to their clothes long after they'd gone home. Clara's family carried the weight in different ways. Her mother withdrew into silence, her hands forever clutching the fragment of apron, as though it were the only proof her daughter had ever lived. Her father wasted away beside the lake, until one evening he never came home. They found his truck parked at the shoreline driver's door, open seat empty. He was never seen again. Her sister raised children of her own far from Michigan, but confessed privately that she feared their laughter because sometimes it sounded too much like Clara's. And the detective, he aged, he withered, but he did not stop. He spoke less of evidence, more of hunger. He told one confidant shortly before disappearing from public life, "The land feeds. It always has. We only noticed when it took someone we couldn't bear to lose." He was last seen walking the back road at dusk, coat drawn tight, head bowed. When neighbors checked his home days later, they found the maps stripped from the walls, the journals gone, the lights left burning. On his desk lay only one page torn and scrawled in trembling ink. "You can't leave." And he hadn't. The house remains empty, though locals say the light in the study still flickers some nights long after the power was cut. No one goes near it. No one wants to know. Time passed, but the silence did not soften. If anything, it grew heavier, more deliberate, settling over the county like a fog. The files remained open, their edges yellowing. The photographs faded. Yet the story of Clara Monroe did not fade. It rooted itself into the ground, into the lake, into the very air. Because some vanishings do not end with forgetting. Some deepen, widen, until they are no longer stories of people at all, but of places. Places that consume places, that hold places that wait. And so the detective's coldest case was never solved, never closed. It became something larger, something the town carries like a shadow it can never step free from. When night falls, and the crickets grow frantic before cutting off in sudden silence, when the wind carries the smell of rust through the pines, when headlights catch the mist on that back road, and the world narrows to two thin beams of light, people still remember. They remember Clara Monroe, not as a victim, not even as a mystery, but as a reminder that some places do not let go. The lake still waits, the woods still listen, and if you stand too long in their silence, you may hear it too, a knock against the water, faint but steady, carrying through the dark. 1, 2, 3. Then a pause. And then the words rising not from the throat of any living thing, but from the night itself, whispering in a voice that is neither male nor female, young nor old, but something else entirely, something that does not forget. You can't leave. And if you hear it, maybe you already haven't. Years slip past, children are born, houses rise and fall, roads crack beneath new winters. But the trees remain tall and indifferent, their roots knotted deep in the soil where memory festers. They do not move, they do not bend, they only wait. And waiting, after all, is what the lake has always done best. Ask anyone who has lived in that county long enough, and they will tell you, though not in daylight, not with a clear voice, that the water is not still, but watching. That it holds its black surface like a lid keeping something below. That if you stare too long, the ripples begin to shape themselves into patterns that are not random, but language. A language no one should learn. The detective knew this in his final years. He walked the shoreline as though tracing words written in a script only he could read. Each step left prints that the mud swallowed instantly, erasing him even as he moved. And perhaps that was the truest fate of all those who searched too long for Clara Monroe, not to solve her case, but to vanish into its silence, carried like another secret beneath the water's skin. The file sits now in a cabinet no one opens. Its photographs have dulled. The handwriting in the margins has begun to fade. But the weight of it remains. Ask the officers who still serve in that county, quiet men with tired eyes, and they will admit they avoid the lake. Not because of stories, not because of fear, but because in the stillness, in the fog, in the smell of mildew and rust that rises from its depths, they feel something looking back. The townspeople still mark the date of Clara's disappearance, though not with vigils, not with flowers. They do it silently. They stay indoors. They keep lights burning in windows all night, as though afraid that if the dark grows too complete, the woods will come knocking again. And sometimes it does. Reports continue. A fisherman swears he saw pale hands rise from the shallows before sinking again. A couple claims they heard a woman laughing in the trees, though no one was near. Drivers whisper of headlights that appear in their rearview mirror on the back road, trailing them at a distance, only to vanish when they pull aside. Always at night. Always near the lake. Clara Monroe has become both absence and presence, gone, yet never gone. Her story no longer belongs to detectives or family, or even the town. It belongs to the land etched into its silence, like a scar that will never heal. And that is perhaps the cruelest truth of all. Because Clara was not reckless. She was not naive. She did not walk willingly into the jaws of danger. She was ordinary. She was loved. She was expected at her sister's house that night, 20 minutes down a familiar road. She lived the life all of us live, until the moment the ordinary world gave way to something else. Something that does not care for reason. Something that does not let go. Reflection is all that remains. Reflection and warning. For the detective's words linger longer than the file itself. We weren't chasing a person, he said once. We were standing in the mouth of something that doesn't want to let go. And the mouth is still open. So when you hear of Clara Monroe, do not think of her as a case to be solved, or even a mystery to be puzzled over. Think of her as a marker, a reminder of what silence can hide, of what the night can consume, of how quickly the world you trust can shift beneath your feet. Because some vanishings do not end. They echo, they repeat. They wait for the next step into the wrong place at the wrong time. And when that step is taken, whether by you or by someone you love, there will be no struggle, no sign, no trace. Only silence, only the smell of rust in the air, the faint knock across the water, the words breathed into the dark by a voice you will never see. You can't leave. Not Clara, not the detective, not the others before them, not the ones yet to come, and perhaps not you if you stay too long listening. Because even now the lake is watching, the woods are listening, and the silence is waiting, heavy and endless, ready to close over the next life that wanders too near.